They say age is just a number. But to my own son, it became a label, a joke. He thought I was past my prime, an old man with nothing left to offer. I still remember that night as if it happened yesterday. I was walking past his room when I heard him laughing with his friends. Their words cut through me like a knife. "He's just an old man," my son said. "He doesn't understand the world anymore." For a moment I froze. It felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. I had sacrificed everything for that boy, my time, my dreams, my health, so he could have a future I never had. And now, the future I had given him was the very thing he used to mock me. But instead of letting the pain break me, I made a decision. I would show him that wisdom, resilience, and courage don't come with a price tag. They're earned through a lifetime of fighting battles he knew nothing about. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, I promised myself one thing. I would not go quietly into the shadows. I would take control of my life, make the boldest move I had ever made, and prove to him and to myself that age doesn't define a man's worth. This is the story of how I turned pain into power and reminded my son what true strength looks like. My name is Thomas, and for most of my life, I have been one thing above all else: a provider. Not just for my son, but for my entire family. I grew up in a small town where hard work wasn't just expected, it was survival. The streets were quiet, the houses modest, and life wasn't about luxury, but about doing what had to be done. My father taught me to work with my hands: carpentry, fixing engines, repairing fences. "Son," he used to say, "a man's worth isn't measured by how much money he has, but by how many people can depend on him when times get tough." Those words became my compass. When I became a father myself, I made the same promise to my boy that my father once made to me, that I would always show up, no matter how hard it got. I took on extra shifts, worked nights and weekends, and came home with my clothes soaked in sweat, and my back screaming in pain. But every ache felt worth it when I saw my son smiling, running up to me with open arms. Our home wasn't big, but it was warm. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee every morning. The walls were covered with little handprints and family photos, and the old wooden porch creaked under our weight as we sat outside at dusk, talking about dreams. I would sit there, telling my boy stories about how anything was possible if you worked for it. He would nod, wide-eyed, hanging on every word. Those were the best years of my life. My boy looked at me like I was a hero. I was the man who could fix anything, solve any problem, protect him from every storm. But as time passed, things changed. As they always do, he grew taller, stronger, sharper. School turned into college, and college turned into a career. I watched him put on suits instead of sneakers, shake hands with important people, and talk about investments and opportunities I had never heard of. I was proud. God, I was proud. Every milestone felt like proof that my sacrifices had meant something. But somewhere along the way, I noticed the way he started looking at me. The respect was still there, at first. But it was quieter now. Our conversations became shorter. He stopped asking me for advice and started giving me advice I didn't ask for. Little comments here and there. "Dad, you wouldn't understand this," or "Things don't work like that anymore," started to sting. I would laugh it off, tell myself it was just part of him growing up. After all, I was getting older, slower. My hair was turning gray, my knees ached in the morning, and I wasn't as quick with my tools as I used to be. But I never stopped working. I never stopped being the man I had always been. Our small town had changed too. The local factory where I had worked for nearly 20 years shut its doors, and suddenly I had to find work wherever I could, repairing fences, helping neighbors, fix their roofs, taking odd jobs just to keep busy and keep the bills paid. The money wasn't what it used to be, but my hands stayed busy. My mind stayed sharp. Some evenings, after finishing a long day of work, I would sit on the porch alone. The house was too quiet now. I'd watch the sun go down and wonder when. Life had started moving so fast, and when exactly my son had stopped needing me. Inside the house, the furniture was the same, but the air felt different. The laughter that used to fill the rooms was gone, replaced with silence or the faint hum of a television. The family photos on the walls felt like ghosts, frozen reminders of when things were simpler, when love was easy and unconditional. I missed those days more than I could ever put into words. Still, I told myself this was what I had worked for, to give him a better life. If he was out there succeeding, then it was worth it, even if he barely called. But there's a certain loneliness that comes with watching the world move on without you, and no matter how strong you are, no matter how much pride you carry in your chest, that loneliness can eat away at you if you let it. I tried not to let it. I kept working. I kept showing up. Because that's what I knew how to do. I didn't realize it then. But those long, quiet nights were preparing me for what was coming next. For the moment that would test not just my patience, but my very sense of who I was. You see, I never thought I would have to prove myself to my own son. I thought the years of sacrifice spoke for themselves. But life has a way of surprising you, sometimes painfully. And soon, I would learn that the boy I raised, the boy who once looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world, no longer saw me as someone worth listening to at all. That realization would hurt more than anything I had faced in my life, more than the layoffs, the financial struggles, even the nights I went hungry just so he could eat. But it would also light a fire inside me that I didn't know I still had. Because if life was going to test me one more time, I was ready. I might have been older, slower, and more tired than I used to be. But I still had one thing left: the will to fight for my dignity. And soon, I would be given the chance to do exactly that. The turning point came on an ordinary afternoon, one of those days that start out so quietly, you'd never expect they'd change your life. I had finished a small repair job for a neighbor and stopped by my son's house to drop off a tool I had lent him weeks before. His car was parked out front, so I figured he was home. I didn't plan to stay long, just say hello, maybe share a cup of coffee like we used to. But as I walked up the driveway, I heard voices from the backyard. Laughter. His laughter. I smiled, at first, happy to hear him sound so carefree. Then I froze. "He's just an old man," my son's voice rang out, clear and sharp. "He doesn't get how things work anymore. I mean, the world's changed. You can't listen to guys like him if you want to get ahead." The group of friends laughed, and he kept going. "Sometimes I think he gives advice just to feel important." I let him talk. But honestly, I stopped listening a long time ago. Their laughter hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, half hidden by the fence, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Surely he didn't mean it like that. Surely I was taking it out of context, but the words replayed in my mind over and over again, each one cutting deeper. I felt something in me break, a mix of sadness, anger, and something else I hadn't felt in years. Determination. I didn't knock. I didn't say hello. I turned around and walked away, my footsteps heavy against the gravel. That night, I sat in my quiet house, staring at the wall. I thought about all the years I had worked myself to the bone, the birthdays I missed because I was working double shifts, the shoes I wore until the soles came off, just so he could have new ones. And now, after all of that, he saw me as nothing, more than an outdated relic. Part of me wanted to scream, to march back to his house and demand respect. But another part of me, the quieter, wiser part, told me that shouting wouldn't change anything. Respect couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, and if my son couldn't see my worth, maybe it was time I reminded him. That night was the first time in a long time I stayed awake past midnight, thinking, planning. I remembered something my father had once told me. The best way to prove someone wrong isn't with words. It's with what you do when they're not looking. So I made a decision. I would not spend the rest of my life being the man my son pitied. I would take everything I had learned, every lesson, every scar, every ounce of grit, and build something for myself. But it wouldn't be easy. I had to start from scratch. My savings were small, just enough to live modestly. But I still had my mind, my work ethic, and my experience. And sometimes that's worth more than money. The next morning, I drove into town, stopping at the local diner where old friends gathered for coffee. I started asking questions about business opportunities, about the housing market, about what was changing in the community. People were surprised to see me so focused. "You thinking of starting something new, Thomas?" one of them asked. I just smiled. Something like that. It felt strange at first, like I was stepping into a world I didn't quite belong to anymore. But the more I learned, the more excited I became. It had been years since I had challenged myself like this, and the fire that had been dimming inside me started to burn again. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began piecing together a plan. I made calls, met with people, took risks I never thought I'd take at my age. There were moments of doubt, nights when I stared at the ceiling wondering if I was a fool for even trying. But every time I thought of quitting, I heard my son's voice again. He's just an old man, and that was enough to keep me going. Meanwhile, my son was thriving, or at least that's how it looked on the surface. Every time I saw him, he was busy, distracted, always talking about new deals and projects. He had the life I once dreamed. For him, a good job, a nice house, a shiny car. But there was a distance between us now that hadn't been there before. He stopped inviting me over for dinners. When we did talk, it was short, polite, almost formal, like he was speaking to a stranger. And though it hurt, it also fueled me, because I wasn't just trying to prove something to him anymore. I was proving something to myself, that I was still capable, that I was still relevant, that I was still a man who mattered. And soon, my quiet efforts would begin to bear fruit, setting the stage for the moment that would change everything between us. The first few months of my new plan were the hardest. Starting over at my age wasn't just a challenge, it was a battle with myself. I woke up earlier than ever before, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and a calculator, going over numbers until my head hurt. My savings were thin, and I knew that one wrong move could wipe out what little I had left. But that only made me more determined to make every decision count. I began attending local community meetings and business workshops, places I hadn't stepped foot in for years. At first, I felt out of place, surrounded by younger men in crisp suits talking about ROI and market volatility. I showed up in my work boots, the smell of sawdust still clinging to me. Some looked at me, with polite smiles, others with quiet judgment, but I kept my head high. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to learn. Slowly, piece by piece, things started to come together. I found a property, a small, run-down workshop space at the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was affordable. I put nearly every penny of my savings into buying it. The first day I unlocked the door, I stood there in the dust-filled silence, staring at the cracked floor and peeling paint. Most people would have seen a wreck. I saw possibility. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a broom, and started working. Days turned into weeks as I rebuilt that place with my own 2 hands. I repaired the walls, fixed the roof, installed new shelves, and turned the empty space into something usable. Every nail I hammered, every board I replaced, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had lost. But the journey wasn't just physical, it was emotional. There were nights I lay awake, gripped by fear. What if I failed? What if my son was right about me? What if this was just a desperate old man's last foolish attempt to matter? Those doubts gnawed at me, but every morning I got back up and kept going. One afternoon, as I was working on the shop's new sign, my son stopped by unexpectedly. He looked around the place, clearly unimpressed. "Dad, what is this?" he asked, eyebrows raised. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and smiled. "It's mine," I said simply. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You sunk your savings into this old dump? Dad, you should be thinking about retirement, not whatever. This is." His words stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to argue. Instead, I looked him in the eye and said, "Retirement is for men who stop living. I'm not ready to stop." He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and left as some. The door closed. I stood there in the quiet workshop, my chest burning. That moment was a turning point for me. If I had ever doubted my decision before, I didn't anymore. His disbelief was the fuel I needed to push harder. I started taking bigger steps, reaching out to suppliers, negotiating deals, even bringing in a partner who believed in my vision. It wasn't easy. Some days, I worked until my hands bled. Other days, I stared at my dwindling bank account, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But slowly, things began to turn around. The workshop started generating income. Not much at first, but enough to cover costs. Word spread around town that Thomas had started something new, and before long, old friends and neighbors began stopping by. Some brought business, others brought encouragement, and little by little, I started feeling like myself again. But with every small victory came a new layer of emotional weight. My son still didn't see me. Even as I rebuilt my life, he kept his distance. Too busy with his own world to notice that his old man was building something from scratch. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. At night, I would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the stars, wondering if he would ever understand. Wondering if this was about proving him wrong, or proving to myself that I was still worth something. And deep down, I knew the real test hadn't come yet. Because one day, sooner or later, our worlds would collide again. And when that day came, I would be ready. If the first months were about building something from nothing, the next few months were about survival. Running a business was harder than I remembered. There were weeks when the orders were slow, and I barely scraped by. Suppliers raised prices, equipment broke down, and I had to dip into what little emergency money I had left to keep the lights on. Each time something went wrong, I heard my son's words echo in my mind. He doesn't get how things work anymore. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was too old for this. But then I'd look around my shop, at the fresh paint on the walls, the shelves filled with tools, the first dollar bill taped proudly near the register, and I'd feel that stubborn fire in my chest. No, I had come too far to stop now. Started taking jobs no one else wanted. Repairing broken-down farm equipment, restoring furniture people had given up on, even fixing things for free when someone couldn't afford to pay. Word spread fast. Neighbors began saying things like, "Thomas is back," and "You should see what he's doing with that place." For the first time in years, I felt respected. Not just as someone's father, but as a man with something valuable to offer. But even as the business grew, my personal life didn't get easier. One Sunday afternoon, my son came by again, this time with an air of superiority. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking. Maybe you should sell this place before you get in over your head. You could still walk away with a little cash and enjoy whatever time you have left." I clenched my jaw. Whatever time I have left. Those words stung deeper than I expected. "Son," I said quietly, "do you think my life is over just because I'm not as young as you?" He didn't answer right away. He just sighed and said, "You don't understand how risky this is. At your age, one mistake could ruin you." I nodded slowly. "Maybe, but one mistake could ruin anyone, son. You think being young makes you invincible? It doesn't. It just makes you think you have time to fix everything later." He shook his head, clearly frustrated, and left without another word. After he drove away, I sat in my shop for a long time, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from anger. That night, I worked late into the night, pouring every ounce of energy into my next project. If I was going to prove him wrong, I wasn't going to do it halfway. I expanded the business, took on more clients, and even started hiring a couple of younger workers to help me keep up with demand. The shop became more than just a business. It became a symbol. Every new repair, every satisfied customer, every dollar earned was proof that I was still capable of building something meaningful. But with every victory came another reminder of what I was fighting for. I would see my son's car drive by without stopping, hear from neighbors about the big deals he was making in the city, see him post pictures online of his travels, his expensive dinners, his polished life. And each time I wondered, was I proving something to him or to myself? The weight of that question grew heavier every day. Until one evening, after a long day of work, I got a call. It was my son. For the first time in months, he sounded unsure. His voice didn't carry the usual confidence. "Dad," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you. It's important." I didn't know it then. But that call was the beginning of everything changing. For both of us. When I heard my son's voice on the phone that night, something in me tightened. He didn't sound like himself. No arrogance, no condescension. Just quiet, heavy words that carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. And then the line went dead. I barely slept that night. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he coming to tell me he was right? Was he coming to convince me, again, to quit my shop, to give up my dream? But when he showed up the next morning, he looked different. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and the confident son I knew was gone. Instead, he looked like a man carrying the world on his shoulders. "Dad," he said, almost whispering, I lost everything. I set my tools down slowly and waited. He explained how one bad business deal had gone south, a deal he was sure would make him millions. But the partners he trusted betrayed him. The investors pulled out, and he was left holding the debt. His fancy house, his cars, his entire lifestyle. It was all crumbling. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice cracking. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I was better than you. That last line hit me like a punch. He hadn't just been ignoring me. He had truly believed he was beyond me, that my life lessons were obsolete. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence sit between us until it was almost unbearable. Finally, I said, "Sit down, son." We sat at the workbench, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and oil, a smell that had been the background of his entire childhood. "Do you know what this place is?" I asked him. He glanced around. "A workshop?" I shook my head. "This is a reminder. Every nail in this wall, every board on this floor, every hour I spent building it, it's proof that you're never too old to start again." He looked down, ashamed. "When you were little," I continued, "I used to sit you on this bench and tell you stories about hard work and never giving up. Do you remember that?" He nodded slowly. "I never stopped believing those things. I never stopped living by them. But somewhere along the way, you forgot. You thought that money and youth made you invincible, that my way of life was outdated, and maybe I let you think that for too long." His shoulders slumped. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said softly. "I judged you. I thought you were just stuck in the past. But now, standing here, I realize you've built something I can't even imagine having the strength to build right now." For the first time in years, I saw my son not as the man who had dismissed me, but as the boy I had raised, scared, hurting, and looking for guidance. I put my hand on his shoulder. "You made mistakes," I said. "So did I, at your age, but you're not finished yet, unless you decide you are." He looked at me, confused. "You've lost money, son. That's all. Money can be earned again. What you can't afford to lose is your character." The words seemed to hit him harder than anything else I'd said. I stood and walked him around the shop, showing him the projects I had been working on, the furniture I restored, the tools I repaired, the shelves of finished work ready for delivery. "This isn't just a shop," I told him. "This is my second chance, and it can be yours too, if you're willing to swallow your pride and start again." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded. "I want to try," he said quietly. "But I don't even know where to start." I smiled. That's the beauty of starting over. You don't need to know everything. You just need to take the first step. In that moment, something shifted between us. The anger, the distance, the years of misunderstanding, they didn't disappear completely, but they began to lose their power. I realized that I hadn't just been rebuilding a workshop. I'd been rebuilding myself. And now, maybe, I could help him rebuild too. That was the revelation I needed. I hadn't been trying to prove him wrong. I'd been trying to prove to myself that I still mattered. And I did. Not because of my age. Not because of the money I made. But because I never gave up. The next few days felt like a storm. Not outside, but inside me. My son started coming by the shop more often, sitting quietly on the old bench while I worked. He didn't say much at first, just watched me as I sanded wood or repaired an engine. It was almost as if he was studying me, trying to understand the man he had overlooked for so long. One afternoon, he finally spoke. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking, maybe I could help out here, at least until I figure out what I'm going to do next." I put down the tool in my hand and looked at him carefully. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Not for him to beg for help, but for him to finally see value in what I was doing. "I don't need a helper," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What I need is a partner, someone who shows up ready to work, who's willing to get their hands dirty and learn something new." He blinked, surprised. "I can do that," he said quickly. I don't know if I'll be good at it." I smiled. "None of us are good at anything in the beginning. What matters is that you're willing to try." So, he stayed. Thadri's first day was awkward. His polished shoes and button-down shirt didn't last long. Within an hour, they were covered in sawdust. He complained at first, but slowly, something began to shift. As he worked beside me, I noticed the change in his posture, the way he listened when I spoke, the way he asked questions instead of dismissing my answers, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the boy I had raised, the one who used to follow me around the garage, eager to learn. But this time, I didn't just give him instructions, I gave him lessons. "This isn't just about fixing things," I told him one evening as we swept the floor. "It's about fixing yourself. Every nail you hammer, every screw you tighten. It's a reminder that nothing is beyond repair, if you're willing to do the work." He nodded, his face serious. The work was hard, but something about it humbled him, and little by little, the walls between us began to come down. Still, the moment of reckoning came one Friday night when we sat down after a long day's work. He broke the silence first. "Dad," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said that night, but for all the times I dismissed you. I thought I knew better because I had money, because I had success. But standing here now, I realize I didn't know anything." His words hit me harder than I expected. "You don't have to apologize, son," I said, though my voice shook. "You just have to remember this moment. Remember what it feels like to start from scratch, to build something with your own hands. That feeling will guide you for the rest of your life." For the first time, he looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Admiration. "Dad," he said, "you were right. Age doesn't define a man's worth. Strength does. And you're the strongest man I know." I turned away for a moment, letting the words sink in, letting the emotion wash over me. Because this, right here, was what I had been fighting for all along. Not just his respect, but his understanding. The shop was quiet except for the faint hum of the radio in the background. I looked around at what we had built together, at the tools on the wall, the projects on the shelves, and I realized this was no longer just my second chance. It was his too. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. The next morning felt different. I woke up before sunrise, as I always did. But this time, I didn't feel the heaviness I'd been carrying for so long. There was lightness in my chest, a sense of calm that had been missing for years. When I walked into the shop, my son was already there, sweeping the floor. For a moment, I just stood in the doorway, watching him. It was such a simple thing, but it struck me like a revelation. He wasn't here because he had to be. He was here because he wanted to be. "Morning," I said. He looked up and smiled. Not the polite, distracted smile I had grown used to, but a genuine one. "Morning, Dad." That day, we worked side by side in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of understanding. In the afternoon, we delivered a large restored cabinet to a client across town. It took both of us to carry it inside, and when we set it down, the woman who owned it burst into tears. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said, running her hand along the smooth, polished wood. "I thought it was beyond saving. I can't believe you brought it back to life." I watched my son as she spoke. He looked at me with quiet amazement, as if seeing me for the first time. On the drive back, he finally said what had been on his mind. "Dad, I think I get it now. This isn't just about money for you, is it?" I shook my head. "No, son, it never was. It's about meaning, about taking something broken and giving it a second chance." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's what I need too. A second chance." I glanced at him and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility, but also hope. "That's the thing about second chances," I said. "They're always there. You just have to decide you're willing to earn them." When we got back to the shop, he didn't leave right away. Instead, he stayed late with me, helping me finish one last project. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, he turned to me. "Dad," he said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." I felt a lump rise in my throat. I wanted to tell him everything, about the nights I had sat here alone, wondering if I still mattered, about the pain of hearing him call me useless, about how close I had come to giving up altogether. But I didn't, because this moment wasn't about the past. It was about what came next. "You're my son," I said simply, "and a father's job isn't to give up. It's to keep teaching, even if it takes a lifetime for the lesson to sink in." He nodded, his eyes shining. We didn't need to say anything more. The shop was quiet, but it felt alive, filled with the sound of saws, hammers, and two men rebuilding not just furniture, but a relationship. That night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I looked back one last time. The shop wasn't just a workshop anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, of redemption, of a bond between a father and son that had been tested and reforged stronger than ever. For the first time in a long time, I walked home not as a man trying to prove his worth, but as a man who had already done it. And I knew my son saw it too. The weeks that followed felt like the start of a new chapter, not just for me, but for both of us. My son kept coming to the shop every morning, no longer out of obligation, but because he wanted to be there. At first, he mostly watched, but as the days passed, he became more involved, cutting wood, assembling pieces, even negotiating with customers. I could see his confidence coming back, but it was different this time, softer, humbler. He was learning that real confidence doesn't come from having everything, but from knowing you can rebuild when you lose it all. One evening, we stayed late, putting the finishing touches on a custom table we had worked on together. It was a beautiful piece, solid oak, polished until it gleamed under the shop lights. When we were done, we stood there side by side, admiring it. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I used to think this kind of work was beneath me. I thought success was about big deals, big numbers, big headlines. But this feels better than any of that." I nodded. "Because this is honest work. It's not about how many people notice you. It's about knowing you gave something. Your best." He smiled. "I think I finally get what you were trying to teach me all those years." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. This was what I had been fighting for. Not just his respect, but his understanding. And now, standing here, I realized I didn't just have my son back. I had earned something even more valuable: his trust. A few days later, he came to me with an idea. "What if we make this bigger?" he said. "What if we take what you started and grow it into something that helps the whole community?" Daitui raised an eyebrow. "You think we're ready for that?" He grinned. "I think we're ready for anything." So we started planning. Together this time. We reached out to neighbors, offering apprenticeships to young men and women in town who needed a second chance, just like I once did. Before long, the shop wasn't just ours anymore. It became a place where people came to learn, to work, to rebuild their own lives. And every time I saw a new face walk through that door, I felt a quiet pride. Because this was bigger than just proving myself to my son. This was about showing an entire community that no one is ever too old or too broken to start again. One Sunday, as we closed up for the week, my son turned to me. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if you hadn't built this place, I don't know where I'd be right now. Probably still chasing the wrong things, still thinking I had all the answers." I put a hand on his shoulder. "And if I hadn't heard what you said that night, I might still be sitting at home, wondering if my best years were behind me. Funny how life works, isn't it?" He smiled, a little sadly. "I wish I hadn't hurt you like that." I shook my head. "No, son, don't wish that away. That pain is what made both of us grow. Sometimes you have to break something before you can rebuild it stronger." We stood there quietly for a moment, the smell of sawdust and fresh wood around us, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor, and I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. I had spent months fighting for my dignity, trying to prove that I still mattered. But now I realized I didn't need to prove it anymore. I knew I mattered. Not because of what I had built, but because of the man I had chosen to be. Age hadn't defined me. Failure hadn't defeated me. And my son's words, painful as they had been, had pushed me to rise higher than I ever thought I could. As we locked up for the night, I looked at my son walking beside me and felt a quiet gratitude. I had lost his respect once, but I had gained something better, a bond forged through trial, humility, and forgiveness. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything money could buy. When we reached the end of the street, I looked up at the sky and smiled. It wasn't just the end of a long day. It was the beginning of the rest of our lives. Because no matter how old you are, no matter how far you've fallen, there is always another chance, if you're willing to take it. And that was the lesson I wanted to leave my son, and anyone who might hear my story, that a man's worth isn't measured by his age, his wealth, or the opinions of others. It's measured by his courage to stand back up when the world tells him he's finished. And I, Thomas, had stood back up. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, I want you to pause for just a moment and think about your own life. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age, your background, or where you came from? Have you ever had someone look at you and decide your best days were behind you, that you had nothing left to give? If you have, you know how much it hurts. But you also know what it feels like when that pain turns into determination. This story isn't just about me and my son. It's about every person who has been told they are too old, too late, or too far gone. It's about proving to yourself and to the world that you're worth doesn't expire. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever had a moment where you had to show someone, or yourself, that you were still capable, still strong, still here? What was that moment for you? Tell me in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who needs that reminder today. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own struggles and triumphs, do me a favor. Hit that like button so more people can see this message. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because I have more powerful stories just like this one. Stories about family, resilience, and finding strength when you think you have none left. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been feeling forgotten or dismissed, share this video with them. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind someone that it's never too late to stand back up.